Hey everyone, it's Mandy. Welcome to week 2 of the Here It Is mini sessions. For those of you who don't know, I recently wrote my first book, a book of poems on my life, and these sessions are just a way to further expand on some of those poems. If you don't have my book, that's okay. I'm just using the book as a base for what it is I'm going to be talking about. Last week I talked about my adoption, and this week I will be talking about my experience with childhood emotional abuse. Again, I am not a licensed therapist. I do not have a degree or any kind of certificate in mental health or trauma or anything like that. I'm simply just sharing my story with you. So let's get started. I have some notes over here. When you think about child abuse, usually you're thinking physical abuse, or maybe you're thinking sexual abuse. It's very rare that you hear, or at least for me in my experience, it was rare to hear people talk about emotional abuse. And I think the reason for that is 9 times out of 10, the person doing the abuse and the person receiving the abuse don't even realize that there's abuse happening there. So what is emotional abuse? Well, emotional abuse is yelling, name calling, screaming, belittling, withholding love, support, guidance, physical threats without action. So if I tell you, oh, you make me so mad, and I hit you, that's physical abuse. If I say, oh, you make me so mad, I'm gonna hit you, and I don't follow through, that's emotional abuse. Okay, sorry, I had to look at my notes. So if you're like threatening to hit and then you don't follow through with it, that's technically emotional abuse, because you're kind of putting that fear into the child or whoever it is that you may or may not be abusing. So if you're sitting here and you're thinking of all the things I just listed and you're asking yourself, holy cow, am I emotionally abusing my kid? Because I'm totally guilty of all of that. I'm going to say it's safe to say that you're not. When it becomes abuse is when these yelling, when you have a bad day and you're kind of at your limit, and then your child does something, maybe they ask for a glass of milk and you give it to them and they spill it everywhere, and you react to them by, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that. Why weren't you paying attention? That's not a healthy response, but it's not abuse. It becomes abuse when it's this like daily occurrence of like screaming and yelling, and sometimes if you're the abuser, you almost like set your child up for failure by kind of planting these scenarios where it's going to result in you yelling. And that's kind of like where my story comes into play. So my mom, she had her own form of childhood trauma that she never really healed from. And when you're in pain, you need to find an outlet. You need to find a way to make this pain become a pleasurable thing. So sometimes that manifests in drug use or alcoholism, binge eating, shopping, gambling. You're going to look for something that's going to give you a high to replace all this pain that you're feeling. And for my mom, it kind of manifested in these like terrorizing, really weird, like screaming episodes where she would just like explode. And for my siblings, when she would react this way, they would kind of just brush it off and ignore her and be like, she's just being crazy. And that isn't gonna fulfill her, how do you say it? Like, that's not going to make her feel better. That's not going to give her pleasure. So at some point, my brother and sister, because they are like super older than I am, they eventually left the house, and it was just me and my mom for the longest time. So when she would have these little screaming episodes, the only difference in our situation was how I reacted to it. And there's that saying, like, if a bear comes, you're going to go into fight or flight. But there's also two other responses that aren't really always talked about, and that's freeze and fawn. Fawn being extreme people pleasing, freeze, from my understanding, it's literally what it says, freeze. So if a bear comes, if I'm either gonna fight it or I'm gonna flight it. But for me, I froze and kind of just waited to see if the bear was gonna eat me. And so when my mom would go into these little screaming episodes, my reaction was just to blank face, not move, not defend myself, not cry, not do anything. I couldn't even tell you if I was breathing during these episodes because I kind of would just literally just freeze up. And I think because I would react that way and she could have this episode that she was having for as long as she wanted, I became like the perfect drug of choice. And so she would have an episode. I would take whatever she was throwing at me, whatever was going to come out of this episode, I was going to take it. It would usually end by me being sent to my room or wherever. And it would usually be followed up with an apology. Now, when you have found something that is satisfying you or fulfilling that high, if you will, you're not going to want to get rid of it. So when she would apologize, and maybe if you are a victim of it yourself, when your abuser apologizes, they might apologize in a way that is actually like redirecting the blame. So they're not taking responsibility for what they're doing. They're kind of just reminding you that you are the reason why this happened. So instead of saying, I'm so sorry, I'm just having a really bad day, I didn't mean to react that way, it's coming out as, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that, but you know that when you do this or when you do that, that you make me do blah, blah, blah. And the bad thing about this abuse and the reason why it's so damaging is because when you, especially for me, because you have to remember, I was already dealing with the effects of being an adopted child. That is, in my opinion, already a traumatic experience. So having this blame be put back on me, and these apologies were just always so loving and kind, and they made sense when she would explain to me her reasonings. I really just never hated her, but just really hated myself more. I felt really isolated, and like my home where I'm supposed to be safe, it was a place where I was constantly walking on eggshells. I wasn't living in fear of my mother, but I was living in fear of triggering her or setting her off. And I was constantly trying to figure out a way to just prevent these things from happening, these episodes from happening. And maybe she didn't realize that what she was doing was abuse. And by me not knowing that what she was doing was abuse, I didn't see it for what it was, and I almost just became responsible for her happiness, for her healing. And this happened from whenever it started, I can't remember, all the way up until I was an adult. And the effects of this were just, I may or may not have already been a sensitive person just in general, but because of this abuse, I was extremely sensitive. My sensitivity was at an all-time high because I was so used to getting in trouble and getting yelled at in life outside of my home. I was always just trying to avoid confrontation. I hated having to say no to anybody. I didn't have like a healthy understanding of what a normal functioning relationship should look like, because I only knew what I was already getting. I had a really, really low self-esteem. I had bouts of depression, and I had mild form of anxiety. I just was like a poor decision maker. I had no self-discipline. I had nothing but self-hatred and self-loathing. It was just a big ball of emotion filled with more balls of emotion. And I feel like my brain was just constantly running, and there was no way to just get it to stop. And as I got older, I started to grow tired of it, and I started slowly speaking up. And when, like I said, when your abuser has found their outlet, they don't want to get rid of it. So when I would start speaking up, sometimes it was like, well, I never did that, or no, you're remembering it wrong. I know, I remember. And it's like, No, I remember I was there, and then sometimes it comes in the form of, wait, well, did she, or am I saying it wrong, or maybe I'm the one that's crazy. And it took a really long time and a really, really, really horrible, the worst of the worst of the worst screaming episode for me to finally just say, you know what, enough is enough. I am cutting off all contact with you. Do not call me, do not text me, do not show up at my house, do not ask for pictures of your grandkids. Like, we had to go completely no contact. And I'm very fortunate that my mother gave that to me. She left me alone for, I think it was maybe a total of like 5 or 6 months, and we were able to eventually come back together and talk about it and find forgiveness and find closure. And even though that is no longer an issue and I no longer struggle with that and our relationship's great, I'm still here today struggling with the effects of it. And I've almost unknowingly developed like a self-soothing I don't know what you call it, but I notice I catch myself doing this a lot to my hair, especially when I'm in a situation that becomes overwhelming because I'm extremely introverted. I love human interaction. I hate being social. And I think I started doing this because my adopted dad, when I would go hang out with him on the weekends before we stopped talking to each other altogether, those weekends were kind of the only time I had a little bit of normalcy. You know, he was not married, he didn't have any other kids, so the weekends that I was there, he was able to give me nothing but love and attention. And when I would go to take a nap or go to bed, he would do this. And I think unknowingly I've adopted this like tick, and I do that to kind of like calm myself down. And I don't know if it's just a coping mechanism, but I think this is why healing is important, because I am a mom now. I have 3 kids, and me and my mother, when we talk about these things, we really don't know like how it's started and like why we did it for so long. And you hear and you see memes and all kinds of things about it all the time. You want to break generational curses, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do. I do not want any of what I assumed to think was normal in my childhood to be brought into my parenting, to be passed down to my kids, and so on and so forth. And if you have related to this in any way as an individual, I highly suggest getting some form of therapy or counseling, because it really is mentally damaging and it has a lot of effects. It's almost up there with physical abuse. And if you have noticed that you relate to my mom's aspect of the story, and you believe that you may or may not be emotionally abusing your child, please, for the sake of your child and for the sake of your future grandkids, stop taking it out on them. Go get help, because it is not your child's responsibility to cure you. It is not your child's responsibility to heal you. Even as we get older, it is not our responsibility to be your source of being. You need to find that on your own. Do you feel me? Like, anyways, I don't know. I hope this was informative. I tried really hard to just make notes and try to bring you my story, but also give you a little bit of what I've learned about it. I tend to ramble. I tend to go off in my head, and I'm trying here. But I'm just going to go ahead and kind of conclude this here. This is already getting long. Next week, I do want to talk a little bit more about like the unhealthy coping mechanisms that came from all of this. So again, if you have any questions or if you have any comments or anything you want me to talk about, just leave a comment down below. My email is linked to my channel, so if you want to send me an email so it can be more private, please do. Someone had asked me last week when I asked the same question if I could maybe mention if you've gone through sexual abuse, why does it manifest in not wanting to hug or be affectionate with their kids. And I did a little bit of research and I tried to like pull from my own experience, and I couldn't really find too much. The only thing that I'm gonna assume, and again, this is just all opinion based, I think when we go through something in our childhood, as an attempt to not repeat the cycle, but without really doing any of the work to heal, I think we just kind of like prevent ourselves from getting put into that situation. So if you were physically abused as a child, you might not spank your children when they do something wrong, because maybe you associate spanking with physical abuse. And for the person who asked me, since you dealt with sexual abuse, maybe by withdrawing that, you know, that affection, those hugs or whatever, maybe it was kind of your way to like subconsciously prevent your kids from feeling like you were crossing boundaries, or I don't know, something along that lines. But like I said, that's just all opinion based. Anyways, so yeah, this is already super long. Thank you so much for spending the night with me and listening to me talk. I hope to see you all again next Tuesday. Have a great night. Stay safe, and I'll talk to you later.